camp that Ileana runs. And we had connected at a, just a local event for the business I run. I'm a financial advisor with my dad. And we got talking about your program, and my dad ended up stepping in and doing a session with you guys last year, Alyssa. And as an offshoot from that, we thought that there might be an opportunity to do some seminars and webinars like this to give you guys, especially as you head into looking for colleges, a little bit more of a financial background. My sort of, I will not stay on my soapbox for too long, but my sort of pet peeve as a financial advisor is that, this stuff is just not taught in schools. So the biggest thing that I'll stress kind of as we walk through the webinar is if I'm talking about stuff and nobody knows what I'm talking about, or if you need me to define something, or if you're confused, like, please, the more interactive, the better. I'll sort of fess up and say that I do a lot of speaking engagements, but this is sort of my first webinar. And it's the thing that I worry about is not being able to sort of read the audience or know when I'm kind of losing people. So please, please, please don't hesitate to jump in and interrupt me. Does that sound like a fair deal? I see nodding of heads. I'll take it. That's good for me. I'll take that. Okay, great. So I sort of, and the other thing too is if you want specifically me to cover something, or if you have a question that you want to make sure that you get answered, feel free to chat it to me or jump in and say it, because really this is about making sure that you guys get, Alyssa and I had talked about this webinar quite a bit, and if you could get one message out of it, forget all the nitty-gritty details that we're going to go into, but if you could get one message out of this, it's that there are tools to help you guys with this, and there are resources and people that can help you with this. So you certainly shouldn't feel like this is a one-off. If you want to come back at me with questions afterwards, if once you're walking through your financial aid packages, you want somebody to kind of explain some of the stuff on them, really, that's the message I want you guys to get is nobody knows this stuff, and you don't have to feel like you're going at it alone, or try and translate it all yourself. So that's a big message that I wanted to get across to you guys. As far as the nitty-gritty pieces of it, I'm going to go into, basically there's sort of 3 sections of the webinar that I wanted to cover from a content standpoint. So the first thing I'm going to go through with you guys is the structure of student loan debt, or actually any debt, to be honest with you. We're just going to talk about how debt works. I always find that once people understand the way that debt is structured, it's like it opens sort of a floodgate. It helps you understand all of the rest of how you're going to approach it. So if you can understand how it's structured, you can pretty much figure out how it's going to fit into your plan as we go forward, okay? So I'm going to start there and give you a tool that you can continuously refer back to. Super easy to find. Everything that I'm using as tools today are things that you can just, as long as you know the name of it, you can Google and find about 50 of them. So I'll give you a tool so that you can go back as you're not only doing your college application process and deciding where you're going to go to school, but while you're in school and you're accruing the debt so that you can know, kind of what you're on the hook for. The second thing I want to go through is just, you're going to get hit with so much terminology in terms of different types of loans. Some of it you might have already run across, subsidized, unsubsidized, fixed, graduated, parent plus, private loans. They're just going to throw a lot of jargon at you. And I want to go through and see if we can demystify some of that. So talk about different types of loan structures so that you can, maybe at least have a reference point back to this webinar as you start to see it come up on some of those letters, excuse me. And then the last thing I'm going to do is just do like kind of a general overview of budgeting. Alyssa reached out to some former Ileana graduates who had gone off to college, and we asked them for some sort of live data of where they're at now. Did they accrue student loans? How much are those? What's their income look like? What's their, bills and rent and all that kind of stuff. So we'll walk through some budgeting examples. And then again, I'll follow it up with an article with some tools that you can use to learn about budgeting. So that's kind of my plan. Like I said, if you've got stuff you want me to cover, I'm begging you to jump in. I despite what my mother would say, I don't like talking at people as much as I like talking with people. So feel free to jump in. Okay? Fair deal? All right. Let's jump into the structure of debt. So there are basically, and I'm in the first example I use, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend like you and I, so any of you and me, have just decided that between the two of us, we're going to do a situation where one of us is loaning the other person money. So you're loaning me money in this example, okay? If you are loaning somebody money, what are the three things, and there are kind of three, that we need to agree on before I take that loan out? Does anyone have a sense of what those might be? I'm putting some pressure on you. Somebody jump in.
The expected time frame for when you need to get the money back.
Yes, exactly. You're going to want a time frame for when you get that money back. In the loan world, or in the traditional debt structure world, that's kind of known as a payoff term. And those can vary pretty widely. I'll talk about what they are for within the federal loan system, because there's 3 payoff terms in the federal loan system. But if you go outside of the federal loan system and you borrow money from a private institution, now you've opened up a whole world of all these other different payoff terms that you could potentially have. But 100% right. Yeah, the first thing is, when am I going to get my money back from you? Okay. What's item number 2? Can anybody think of it?
How much money that you'll be getting or giving?
Exactly. So generally speaking, with a loan, I think of a mortgage where you borrow money for a house or something like that. Generally speaking, that amount is agreed to up front. Student loans and credit cards are kind of the one area. Credit cards are a little different, but they're sort of the one area where that might not actually be the case. It might be the case for 1 year. So, for example, the federal government has X amount of dollars available for people to borrow in a 1-year period of time. But again, once you go outside of that federal system and you're looking at private loans, a lot of times they'll kind of treat it like a blank check. And that's a caution, because what that really means is that they've put the burden on you to sort of know what you're, as I'll continue to say, getting yourself on the hook for. So the tool that I'm going to give you guys will help you be able to determine what your payments are for different amounts of money that you're borrowing, based on the third piece that we're going to go into in a second. Because if they're just saying, hey, sky's the limit and we'll let you borrow as much money as you want, you're the one that's going to want to know, okay, well, what is that going to mean once they start to say, okay, now I want my money back. All right. The third one is a little bit trickier. I'm sure people have heard of it, but it's the one that people, I think, at least in my experience, don't have the best understanding of all of them. So I will take a minute on it. Can anyone think of what the third thing is that we want to agree on when you loan me money?
Interest.
Exactly. Can you explain to me what interest means? And no worries if you don't have a good sense of it. Like I said, I can go into some detail.
Like people add interest, like if you're late on it, or if it's gonna take a certain amount of time than what people expected, they'll add interest. And interest can be like, I don't know, a multiplied an amount to it.
Yeah, that's partially true. So that's definitely true with credit cards. So generally speaking, with credit card, for example, if you pay it back within that monthly time frame, interest doesn't apply. You can use their money for basically a month for free. But beyond that amount of time, that's when credit cards start to throw an interest rate on. With all other loans other than credit cards, so student loans included, generally speaking, there is always interest on the loan. It's not an if or a possibility. It's always built in. And my simple definition of interest is it's rent that you're paying somebody else for the privilege of borrowing their money. Okay? So if I'm borrowing money from you, chances are you don't want to give it to me for free, right? Because while I have your money, that's money that you can't use. In the same way that if I own an apartment building and I go to let you use a piece of that space, an apartment, I want something in return for that. So that's exactly what interest is on a loan. It's rent that you're paying somebody else for the privilege of getting to use their money for a period of time. Okay? Does that make sense? Anybody have questions about that? Because like I say, we're kind of going to build like building blocks on top of this. All right. Okay. So now you've got your 3 items that have to come into any loan at all. Okay. You have to agree on the amount of money that you borrow. You have to agree on the rent that you're going to pay somebody else for the privilege of borrowing that money. And you have to agree on the payoff term, okay? And generally speaking, again, I'm kind of putting student loans off to the side just for a second. Generally speaking, all 3 of those things are agreed upon upfront when you take out a loan, all right? I'm gonna come back to interest for just a minute. Interest is generally expressed in terms of a percentage of the debt that you borrow. So I'm going to jump into our first tool, which has a long name, but is really quite simple. And it's called an amortization calculator. All right. Now, like I said, you can Google, I literally Googled it this morning, and I happen to be using the one from creditkarma.com. You can use any one that you want, and they're all going to give you a sense of all this kind of stuff. For the first example that I use, I'm going to use a really simple one. Bear with me for just a second. I'm going to use a simple example. I like to use round numbers off the start. And as you can see the 3 elements to that debt are right here at the top. You've got your loan amount, your interest rate, and the number of years it's going to take you to pay it back. So you can build into this calculator any sort of set of variables that you want, but I'm going to start with this one. The reason I'm starting with this one, like I say, is just it's round numbers, and we'll play with it so that you can see how these numbers change. So let's say that I had decided, I live in upstate New York where real estate is dirt cheap. And so let's say I had decided to go out and purchase a house, and I borrow from the bank in order to do this $100,000. And they have set their interest rate at that 5% right there. And we have agreed that I'm going to pay it back over 20 years. The interest that gets calculated on that loan is always a percentage of the amount of, I'm going to use a technical term here, the amount of principal or the amount of the total loan that you have left to pay. Now, let me break that down in a few minutes. I'm going to put a pin in that for just a couple of minutes. Let's look at some numbers at first as we dive into it. So I'm going to hit calculate. And if we had agreed the bank had loaned me money and we agreed on that, this is exactly what that looks like, okay? Over the course of 20 years, you're going to see 240 payments. Each month, the bank has come up with an amount of money that I have to pay them every single month for the course of those 240 months. And that amount of money covers both principal and interest. I'm going to break that down in a second. The original loan amount that I borrowed was this amount over here, the 100,000. And what this is in this center column is it says total payments. In other words, if you look at that total payment column, I will have paid the bank $58,389 over the course of 20 years in interest for the privilege of being able to borrow their money during that time, okay? Now, like I say, this monthly payment that they come up with that I have to pay, in the case of a mortgage, is made up of principal and interest, and that's what you want. But what happens, and I'm going to show you this chart in just a second as we go down, what happens is that as you are paying that loan amount back, the amount of that $660 that is interest versus principal, which just means the original amount that you borrowed, shifts over time. So let's look at the chart really quickly. I'm not hearing anybody jump in, which makes me think that you're following this, but again, please, please, please interrupt me if I'm wrong. So let's look at this. In the first month, your payment amount is this $660. Of that $660, in the first month, 417 of that was interest to the bank. 243 of it was principal payment. So when you look at the mortgage balance, they've subtracted the 243 off of the 100,000, and now the total debt left to pay is $99,757. In other words, if you won the lottery in March of 2019 before your next payment was due, and you said, forget this loan, I'm going to pay this thing off, you wouldn't be paying off $100,000 minus $660 because you had to pay the bank $417 in the first month for the privilege of using that money. You have to pay the bank $99,757. I'm going to stop there because I saw at least one confused face in my gallery. Is everybody following me so far? It's very quiet.
Sorry. I was just like, I understand what you're saying, but like, is it a reason why the interest is higher than the principal rate?
Yes, that's a great question. Remember, I put a pin in my statement where I said the percentage is always calculated based on what's left to pay. Okay, so I'm going to jump down a little bit in the chart if I can. Let me jump down about, what would be about halfway through this loan, 2029, right? Because we did a 20-year. Let's go to February of 2029. Bear with me as I find it. Okay. By that point in time, if I'm looking up to January, you've paid enough down in principal that your mortgage balance heading into February of 2029 or halfway through the loan is $62,222. What the bank does to calculate the interest along the way is that the interest that you have to pay is a percentage of what you have left to pay. Now, for a lot of complicated reasons, it's possible that if I did the math right now on this, the numbers might not work out exactly. Can you bear with me? Let me do the math and just check for 1 second. I'm curious about this. The concept is there, but yeah, it's right on the money. So if you have a calculator in front of you, here's the calculation I just did. I took $62,222 and I multiplied it by 5% because that was my interest rate. What you got was, I have to do it again, $3,111.10. If you divide that number by 12, because remember we're making monthly payments, so there's 12 in a year, you'll see it comes out to, 259. So now let's look at February of 2029. The interest you have to pay in February of 2029, $259, because it's calculated as a percentage of what you had left to pay the month before. Does that make sense? Okay. So you can see that on an amortization schedule like this, where you're looking at the schedule of the loan for the whole period of the loan, that whole 20 years, you can see that even though you're paying the same amount every single month, the amount of that payment that's interest versus principal, and again, principal is just what you have left to pay of what you originally borrowed, changes every single month. So the longer that loan goes on, the more of your payment is made up of principal, and the less of it is made up of interest. If I flash forward, look at the very last payment that you make here, January of 2039. You still make a $660 payment, but now $657 of that was your mortgage, and you're down to only paying the bank $3 in that particular month for the privilege of using their money. Does that help to clear it up a little bit?
Yes.
Okay, good. Now, I'm going to assume for just a moment that we all understand this because I'm not seeing anybody chime in. So again, if I'm wrong, please correct me. But I want to talk about what would happen, and this is a credit card example that I'm going to give, but the same thing applies to student loans, because what you really just saw here as we looked forward on the loan schedule is the effect of compounding on money. And that's a term, I remember my dad using it with me when I was a kid growing up, and I'm like, he may as well have been speaking Chinese to me. I had no idea what he was talking about. But essentially what it means is that if you look at the chart up here, you can kind of see it. Compounding is where over time, the amount is increasing exponentially, not on a straight line that you're paying off that principal, right? Because again, that interest rate is calculated as a percentage of what you have left to pay. So if every single month you're paying off a little bit more, the percentage is still the same, but the dollar amount shifts dramatically over time, because 5% of 100,000 is a bigger number than, say, 5% of 50,000. Okay? But the same thing can happen the other way. So let's hypothetically say that this was a credit card, and because credit card companies actually want you to not pay the full amount of what you've paid. That's how credit card companies make money. So let's say you had borrowed $100,000 from a credit card company, and you've got this same interest rate, this 5%, and now they say, look, you have to make a minimum payment of, say, $20 a month, but we don't really care how much time you take to pay this debt back. Let's imagine that in month one, ignore the minimum payment for just a minute. Let's imagine in month one, we know that to pay this off in 20 years, because we did the calculation, we know we should be making payments of $660, right? And we know further that if we make that first payment of $660 in month one, then the next month, our balance on the mortgage, or the total loan, is $99,757. But let's imagine that we did not make that first payment, okay? What is the amount of interest or the total loan balance going to be in month two if you miss that payment? I'm going to ask it again. You don't make a payment. You originally borrowed $100,000. In month two, what is the total amount of the debt that you now have to pay back?
The 100,500.
How'd you get there? Can you explain it?
Well, you take the 100,000 that you own, you times 105%.
Yep. And then divide it by 12. Remember, because we're making those monthly payments. So that's about right. So now let's say we make the problem worse and we do not pay in month two. What's the total amount in month two that the debt has gone up to? Is it going to be $101,000? Do we add another 500 onto it, Min?
No, we don't.
Why?
Because now we have to take the total amount of money we own and time it to 105% again.
Exactly. And so you can sort of see how if you don't make payments, or you are not making payments that at least cover what you should be paying towards the interest every single month, that compounding effect works the opposite way if you don't make those payments. And that's going to become pretty important when we talk about student loans specifically later on, okay? What happens if we change these different amounts? We know that if we do 100,000 at a 5% interest rate over 20 years, we know our payment is $660. What happens if we cut that amount of time to 10 years? What happens to our monthly payment?
It will go up.
Right. What's going to happen to the total? Oh, shoot, it calculated it for me. If you remember when we had done it based on 100,000 and 5%. Oh, I'm sorry, Tamira. Tamira's around a bunch of trees and she can't hear anything. I'm sorry. If you remember when we did it based on 100,000 with 5% over 20 years, the total amount of interest or rent that we paid to the bank for the privilege of using their money was somewhere around $58,000. Look what happens to that number when you pay it off in 10 years. The amount of rent that you pay to the bank, if you pay it in just 10 years, goes from $58,000 down to just over $27,000. Tremendous difference. But what happened to your monthly budget amount, right? We went from making payments of $660 to over $1,000. Let's go back and put in 20 because I want to give you one more example. What happens to our monthly payment if we increase the interest rate? Same 20 years, $660 payment, but let's say we make it an 8% interest rate. Any idea what happens? Quiet again.
The price will go up.
What do you mean by price?
The how much you owe totally will go up, correct? Because you got a bad credit score.
Well, I'm gonna pick that. You're correct. You're correct. I'm gonna pick it apart a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The total amount that you owed has always stayed the same. We've only borrowed $100,000. But you're right that the amount in total that you are going to end up paying because of that higher interest rate, because you're paying more to the bank, is going to go up. And it goes up pretty significantly if we increase it to that 8% interest rate. But one other thing happens too. By increasing that interest rate, we also are going to increase our monthly payments. So if you have a higher interest rate for the same exact amount of money paid back over the same amount of time, not only are you going to pay the bank back in total more money, but you're going to pay more each month for it. Okay? All right. So far, so good, everybody? Oops.
Yeah.
Checking on my chat really quickly. Yes, exactly, Kai. You end up paying more. Yep, perfect. Okay, it seems like you guys have got a pretty good handle on this. So let me stress one more time this tool. You can find these amortization calculators all over the internet, and you can play around with them and put any amount of loan in. So my recommendation to people as they go through, college and as you're getting these loans is to plug the numbers in to see sort of, as I say, what you're getting yourself on the hook for. I'm going to plug some numbers in that I'd like to use for the rest of today as an example. And I'll tell you where I'm getting them from. The first number I'm going to plug in is 38,000. And that amount is, and I understand, by the way, that this is not going to apply to everybody in this chat. And we hope that it does. But for the purpose of today, I just wanted to use some averages, all right? The average student who takes on student debt over the course of a 4-year degree in the United States, the average student loan debt is around roughly $38,000 per student across the United States. Now, obviously, some have taken out more, some have taken out less. It's not an exact science. It just sort of averages out to 38,000, but I'm going to kind of use that number as we go through. I'm going to say, based on my own personal experience, that the average interest rate I'm seeing is around 6. Again, some loans are higher, some have been lower. We're going to talk about that a little bit, but roughly it's about 6. And then I'm going to play with this number as we go along, but let's just take a look at what it is over a 20-year period of time. So if the average student is paying back the average amount of debt at $38,000, and they're doing that at a 6% interest rate over 20 years, you're going to have payments of roughly $272. I'm going to round that up and say $275 a month based on that debt. Okay? I'm going to jump next into talking about the different types of loans and payoff amount or payoff terms and all that kind of stuff. Does anybody have any questions about amortization schedules or how debt works before I jump into that? No.
Oh, sorry. What is a what schedule? What did you say?
Oh, it's called, and Alyssa, correct me if I'm wrong, you're going to send out some notes on this that have some of these tools, right?
Sorry, yes, I am.
Okay, great. So you'll get all of this afterwards as well, but the word is amortization, these amortization calculators. So the calculator is the piece up here where you type in the info and they calculate it out. The schedule is down here where it shows you how much of your payment each month is made up of interest versus principal and what the total balance will be as the loan goes down.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions before I move on a little bit? Okay. All right. Different types of loans. You're going to see a whole bunch of different types of loans as you go through this process. I'm probably not going to hit on all of them, but you're also going to see a bunch of different payoff types, and I'm going to try and cover those as best as I can. There's two types of federal loans that are available directly to students. One is called subsidized, and one is called unsubsidized. Okay? Subsidized loans have the biggest thing about subsidized loans is that the interest does not start building up until after you graduate. Okay, so has anybody ever heard anybody talk about loans and having them be in deferment? Has anybody ever heard people say that? Oftentimes, what the federal government says when you borrow money from them is, don't worry, we're not going to make you pay any payments on this money that you borrowed until after you're done with your school. And that's what it means when you're in deferment, that you don't have to make any payments until a later date, okay? But, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky and where you've got to really understand the different types of loans that you have. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you aren't paying them for the privilege of using that money while you're not making payments. So if you have a subsidized loan, while it's in deferment, so before you're required to make any payments, they are not going to have interest be growing on that loan. In other words, to make it the simplest I can possibly make it, if you borrow $10,000 that's subsidized while you're going to school, you don't make any payments for the 4 years you're in school, and now you get to the first year where you're out of school, that's still going to be a $10,000 loan. That's going to be the amount of the loan when you get out there, okay? I've also typically seen, this is typically, but it's not always the case, that subsidized loans tend to have a lower interest rate than unsubsidized loans. But that's not always the case. They're not terribly different. All right? Now, unsubsidized loans are different. And this is where I'm going to go back to my credit card example where the compounding went up. Unsubsidized loans, they'll say, don't worry, you don't have to make any payments until you graduate. However, we are going to let the interest, what the word is accrue or grow during that time. So if you borrow $10,000 in your first year and you make no payments on it while you're in school, when you get out to graduation and now they're saying you got to start making payments, you're going to have to pay more back than the $10,000. All that interest during that time will have grown. And don't forget, it's not just growing, it's compounding on itself. Because if that $10,000 was at that 5% interest rate, because you weren't making payments, the next month it's $10,050. Then the next month it's 5% of the $10,050. So it's gone up and up and up and up and up. I see people shaking their heads. All that means to me is that you finally learned how much of a screw job this system is. Okay, fair enough. I hate it too if it makes you feel any better. So if I can make a recommendation, and I do understand, by the way, that this isn't always easy, but if it is possible on those unsubsidized loans, one thing you can do to help yourself out is, even though those loans will be in deferment while you're in school, if you could just try and pay the interest on them while you're in school, so that when you get out to graduation, you still only owe the $10,000, that's a great thing to do. Or even if you can chip away at that interest a little bit. But, you know, I've been in school. I know how hard it is to find jobs that pay well and pay anything in some cases while you're a student. So it isn't always something that you can do, but just because, I see your question, I'll get to you in just a second. Just because they say that your loans are in deferment and you don't have to make a payment, doesn't mean that you can't, okay? Go ahead, Ama.
Okay.
Oh, okay, no problem. Yep, go ahead and type it out. All good. So there's two other types of loans I'm going to cover. The next one is also a federal loan. So unsubsidized and subsidized loans are all loans from the federal government. There's one other type of loan from the federal government, and those are Parent Plus loans, which are made to parents, okay? Typically speaking, a lot of times parents will take those loans out, but say to their kids, hey, when you get out of school, you're going to be responsible for paying them. But that's up to you and your parents. You got to cut a deal with them on that piece of it. What I will say, and this is about Parent Plus loans as well as private loans. So let's say you've used up all the money that you can possibly get from the federal system, but you still need more. That's when most people are going out and borrow money from a private institution. Those loans, by the way, are going to have a totally different terms than the federal loan. So anything I say about payoff terms, I'm seeing questions, sorry. Like I said, this is my first webinar, so I'm not good at multitasking, forgive me. All the payoff term info that I'm going to give you, that applies to federal loans because they have 3 set payoff terms. Private loans are a totally different deal. You got to cut your own deal in terms of payoff and interest rate and all that kind of stuff with those private companies. But here's one thing that private loans and Parent Plus loans often have in common. Oftentimes, the parents are going to be, at least in part, on the hook for the debt. And this is the part of my presentation where, forgive me, Alyssa, I know I told you I wouldn't do a lot of, say, product placement advertisement. But here's what I will mention, and there's no way that I can talk about this without bringing up something that's just tremendously depressing. But if your parents co-sign on a private loan or take out a Parent Plus loan and something happens to you, meaning you pass away, they will still be responsible for that debt. And for most of you guys in this chat, you can go out and get an extremely inexpensive term life insurance policy that if something happens to you, you can have it that your parents get the death benefit of that, and it can cover that debt. And when I say extremely inexpensive, I mean it's like you could get it for a couple of bucks a month, maybe a couple $100 a year. And you know, I'll just tell you a story. My dad, like I said, I'm from up in Hamilton, and I work with my dad in this business. And he has had it happen 3 times in his career where he sat across the table from a parent who's just lost a kid and then realized that they're on the hook for their student loan debt. And one guy, he was ready to retire, and the kid had gone to Colgate, and the student loan debt was about $70,000. And now he's lost his kid, and he's lost his retirement too. So it's a really depressing story, and I don't mean to bring you all down on it, but if that happens, if you get those types of loans, please look into something like that so that you don't have to deal with that debt for your parents if something happens to you. Okay? All right, let me take just a second and look at these questions. I'm going to start with Min. Go ahead, Alyssa. I see you wanting to jump in.
Yeah, I have some examples of students' actual financial aid award letters pulled up. So if you would like, we can look at what one should look like. This is an example of a person who did everything right and is not going to be on the hook for a lot of money. Mm-hmm. So Alex, if you want that, I can walk you through a couple of good and a couple of bad, or actually I can put them up and you can walk through, which would probably be smarter.
Sure. So the question that Min had asked was, does institutional aid usually give out subsidized loans or unsubsidized? Great question. So the answer to your question, the short answer is both. Usually when students take out the maximum amount of debt from the federal government, like I say, there's a limit per year that each student can take out. And that limit is going to be made up of subsidized and unsubsidized. Now, to their credit, they always give you the subsidized loan first. So the first one you get is going to be subsidized. The second loan you get from the federal government is going to be unsubsidized. As far as institutional aid goes, meaning aid from the colleges, that's probably where we need to dive into some of those letters, Alyssa. But let me see if I can address Amma's question quickly first. Okay. If I take a subsidized loan and I have the money ready after school, the amount of the loan still stays the same, right? Correct. Yes. If you have a subsidized loan, you haven't made payments and now you graduate, the amount of the loan is the same. And if for whatever reason you had a pile of money sitting over here that was equivalent to the amount of the loan, you could pay it right back and be done with it. Did I read your question right, Amma? Did I answer it properly? Great. Okay, perfect. Alyssa, do you want to pull up one of those letters? While you're doing that, forgive me, we're getting a snowstorm in Hamilton and it's getting cold in here. I have to turn on my heater on my feet.
Wow.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So like before we sign up for a loan, you say there will be a time agreement. So if by the time I graduate and I have enough money to pay off the loan, how does that benefit the loan company?
If it's a subsidized loan, it would not benefit the loan company. They would make nothing off of you in that case. If it's an unsubsidized loan and you had not been making payments while you were in school, then you'd be required to pay not only the original amount of the loan, but whatever interest had, I'm going to keep using that word accrued, but had grown during that time. So let's say hypothetically the loan had grown to $10,800. It was an unsubsidized loan. You'd have to pay the $10,800 back at that point in time. That would be the payout amount and how much money they would, I'm going to use the word again, make off of you if you were paying it back the month after you graduated all in one shot because you had this pile of cash sitting there. Generally speaking, what happens is at that point in time, you enter into a payoff agreement with the company that says, I'm going to pay it off over this period of time. So let's say it was a 10-year period of time. That's when we'd have our amortization calculator and you type in 10,800, a 10-year period of time, whatever interest rate that is, and then it would show you what your monthly payment would be. Does that answer your question, Min? Great. Okay, let's take a look at this. I'm just seeing this, so I might have to take just a second to, all right, this is great because it gets into some terminology. So let's start at the top. Your total tuition, fees, room and board is this $62,000. And they're putting in a couple of additional figures so that for travel, personal needs, book costs, etc. So the total cost of attendance for 1 year is going to be the $65,000 number. All right. I'm not going to look at how they break this down over fall, winter, or spring. Let's just look at the total column. So under institutional aid, that means aid that is coming from the college. It looks to me like they're giving 2 different scholarships. Scholarships and grants don't have to be paid back. So that's the good news. It looks to me like between this line and this line, you've got about $40,000 of that 65 in the year that is not going to need to be paid back. Okay. I'm guessing that these other items also won't have to be paid back, Alyssa, but I don't know what this line item, the Anlay, Stephen, and Judith, I'm guessing it's a scholarship name.
It is. All of the institutional aid doesn't have to be paid back in this case because they're all scholarships.
Is that always the case, Alyssa?
The difference, so actually this is a great question. Alex and I were talking about this right before y'all came on, and the difference between a scholarship, a grant, and a loan. Because Alex went to school in Canada, and so these are terms that are less familiar to her, like what each one actually means. Grants don't have to be, right. Grants don't have to be paid back, and scholarships don't have to be paid back. The only thing that has to be paid back is a loan. So if you look at her award letter, and this is a staff member, a person that worked for us in 2015, her name was Gabriela, and this is her actual financial aid award letter, which she said you can share with students like forever. I'm happy to help.
So if you look on that, if we scroll down, I've got to switch this over in just a second. If you scroll down, we can see the award total is at $64,000. However, and this is where you got to be careful. If all you did is look at the award total, you might think, great, 64,000 of my 65 doesn't have to be paid back. However, this line item right here, federal direct loan subsidized for 3,500, that's a subsidized loan that she's gonna have to pay back after she gets out of school. So assuming that the financial aid package was precisely the same for all 4 years, and she takes out $3,500 in loans per year, she's gonna have $14,000 of debt at the end of her 4 years of school. And I can tell you, I can look you in the eye and promise you that that would be the amount that she'd have to pay back, because they'd all be subsidized loans, because that's where the federal government goes first. So no interest would be accruing during that time. She gets out of school, she has to start making payments, and the payment is going to be based on a $14,000 payoff amount at that point in time. Make sense? It's quiet again. All right, I've got some thumbs up. That's good. Okay, great. Yep, go ahead, Amma. You got to type it again. I'll just wait for a minute for it to come up. While she's typing her question, let me get into, and again, from this point forward, I'm only going to be talking about federal loans, because private loans are it's a whole other ball game, because they're so specific to the individual situation. But federal loans give you 3 options for payoff terms for paying these loans back, okay? The first type is a 10-year payoff term. The second type is a 20-year payoff term. And the third type is something called income-based repayment. Okay? I'm going to give you one piece of advice just from having seen a bunch of these. If you can avoid income-based repayment, please avoid it at all costs. And here's my reason for saying that. I have never seen an income-based repayment payment amount per month that covers the principal in that month. In other words, every single income-based repayment plan I've ever seen, you're not covering the principal amount of the payment. So if I go back to my, Alyssa, I'm going to share my screen again. I hope that's okay.
Yep.
If I go back to my, although I also don't know how to get out of here. If I go back to my amortization schedule, I go back up to the top. This is, remember, I'm doing average student loan debt. My monthly payment, if I'm going to pay this off over 20 years, should be $272 a month.
Oh, Alex, can you share your screen? We can't see your screen yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yep. Maybe. Give me a second. Okay.
We got you.
Great. So my payment amount should be $272 per month. If I saw that, and again, this is just based on a 20-year payment. So if we had a goal of paying the debt off in 20 years, we should be paying $272 a month. If I see an income-based repayment plan, oftentimes in a case like that, the payment would be something like $60 a month. Well, look at just the first month. We know that in the first month, if we wanted to pay the debt off in 20 years, we should be paying at least I've got it backwards. Let me straighten it around. We need to pay off at least the interest if we want to pay it off in 20 years. So the payment amount might be like $60, $100. Either way, it doesn't matter, because we know that the interest that accrues in that first month is $190. So if we're not paying enough to cover the interest, that means that loan amount is just going to keep going up. So oftentimes with an income-based repayment plan, that's how they, in my opinion, get people on the hook kind of for a lifetime, where it takes a long time to pay this debt back. And believe me when I say they're perfectly happy to do it. The reason is because the less you pay each month, the more that loan goes up, and the more this number here goes in their favor, where you've paid them more for the privilege of borrowing their money. So if you can avoid income-based, I'd recommend it if you possibly can. Let me jump into the chat really quickly. Hold on. Oh, great question, Amma. Okay, she asked over how many months does the interest start adding up to the principal amount? I think what you're asking, and please jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, is when do they start adding that interest on if you've missed a payment or if your payment wasn't enough to cover the interest? And the answer to your question is right away. Most of the time they're looking at these loans on a monthly basis, not on a yearly basis. So even if you paid the amount of money in a year that you were supposed to pay in interest, if you didn't pay the amount that you were supposed to pay in interest, or for your full payment in the first month or in month 3 or 4, they're going to add that on right away after you miss that in the month. Is that your question, Amma? Does that make sense? In other words, they're not forgiving. I'm just going to stop right there if I can. Okay. All right. While you're rephrasing, let me take a look at the, let's go back into the payment options. So 10-year, 20-year, and an income-based repayment plan. Okay. Now inside of the 10 and 20-year payments, they also have 2 options. They have something called a fixed payment plan and something called a graduated payment plan. Okay. Or sometimes the fixed payment plan is called level. All right. I like calling it level or fixed because it tells you exactly what it is. What it means is that that payment amount per month, that $272, would not change for the entire time that you're paying back the loan. So if you wanted to pay this loan back over 20 years, we know your payments should be $272. And under a fixed or a level payment plan, that's exactly what they'll be. They'll be that in month 1, month 30, month 187, whatever, okay? In a graduated payment plan, the payment amount will actually go up over time. Now, the philosophy behind that was, hey, when you first get out of school, you may not be in the best job payment-wise that you're going to be in over the course of your career. Oftentimes people make more money as their career goes on. You know, you get raises, even raises for cost of living, etc. Amma, I see your question. I'm not ignoring it. I'll come back to it. Okay. So the idea behind a graduated payment plan was, well, why don't we start you off a little bit lower so that that payment fits into that starting salary a little bit better. But then as time goes on, that payment amount will increase. Now, the total number of years doesn't increase, so this is not the same as an income-based repayment plan. You are going to be chipping away at principal and interest. They've figured all of that in. It's not like you're not going to owe any more money by doing a graduated payment plan versus a fixed. But where I have seen people get caught on a graduated payment plan is, well, what happens if those raises don't kick in? So every 5 years, their payment amount is going up per month in what they have to pay. But if their salary has not gone up and the income hasn't kept pace with it, that's when people sometimes get in trouble on the graduated payment plans. But they're not a bad option if you need to start off in a place that your payments are a little bit lower, because they don't affect the overall amount of the payment. Okay? All right. After how many months does the interest start to take effect to the principal? Because I heard after 6 months, that's when the interest starts getting applied to the principal amount. I understand. Well, I should say I think I understand. So if you look at the amortization schedule, Amma, I think it will answer your question. The interest, the amount of your payment does start chipping away at the principal right away. But you can see in the early parts of the loan how minimally it does that. So let's just look at the first couple of months. In the first month, you pay $82 in principal. The next month, you pay $83, then $83, then $83, then $84, then $84. It's really minimal, the amount in the first part of the loan, how much that chips away at the principal. But remember that it's a compounding effect. So because that interest rate is calculated as a percentage of the principal that you have left, even though it's small amounts, as the loan goes on, the principal will keep getting chipped away at in a bigger way. So if I flash forward again to about halfway through the loan, you can see that now it's 158. If you keep flashing forward, now it's, 199. And as you get closer towards the end of the loan, it's, 250 as opposed to the $80. Does that help to answer your question? But it is really small in the first couple of years because the money hasn't had an opportunity to compound on itself. Other questions I can answer?
So you said to pay the interest off while you're still in school. If you pay off the interest totally, will it grow again or no?
You mean after you get out of school?
Yeah.
So after you get out of school, assuming that you do not do an income-based repayment plan, after you get out of school, you're going to enter into a payment plan that's either 10 years or 20 years. And you will end up having to pay some interest for the privilege of having to use that money. But it's going to be a lower amount than you would have paid if you hadn't paid the interest during school. But it also isn't going to affect your monthly payment, because once you enter into that payment term, now your payment amount gets kind of locked in. And so does the total overall cost of borrowing that money. So let me see if I can give you an example in the amortization schedule. Let's say, again, the original amount that you had borrowed was $10,000, and let's say you wanted to pay it off over 10 years. On a subsidized loan, we know that that $10,000 won't change. You borrowed $10,000, it's going to be $10,000 when you go to make the payments. When you go to make the payments, now the interest will start to accrue, or you have to start to pay it, but it's only going to accrue over that time of the 10 years. So in total, you're going to pay them $3,322 for the privilege of using that money, but your payment along the way is always going to be that $111, okay? The same will be true with an unsubsidized loan if you paid the interest off along the way, that once you get out there, it's only going to be the $10,000. And so now it looks exactly the same as a subsidized loan because you've paid the interest along the way to get it back to the original amount when you graduate. Where it's different is if you don't pay that interest in that 4 years, that loan amount, that total amount will compound on itself. So the total amount once you enter into a payment plan will be bigger, which will mean that the monthly payment will be bigger than it would have been, as well as the total amount of money that you're going to end up paying. So try and remember these two numbers before I make a shift here. Your payment was $111, and you paid them about $3,300 in interest over the course of the loan for the privilege of using that money. If you had let that money compound on itself, and let's say now you get out there and the loan amount wasn't $10,000, but it was $12,500 because the interest is built over 4 years, now you're going to pay $6,600 in interest over the course of the loan, and your payment isn't $111, it's $139, because the total amount when you went to start making those payments was bigger than it was. Do you want me to say that again? People are looking confused.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Actually. So I was taking notes, and I was going to ask about the federal government Parent Plus loans, right? So is that literally just like your parents pay for it while you're in school, and then when you get out of school, you start paying for it? Is it as simple as that, or?
It's really, officially on paper, the loan agreement is between the federal government and your parents. They are always unsubsidized loans, so the interest will accrue. I'll be very honest with you, I don't know what the rules are on deferment. I think they're deferred while your student or your kid is in school, so no payments are due. but that interest will grow during that time. And then it's as simple as what they say is, look, we don't care who the money's coming from, but we need X amount of dollars per month based on whatever payment plan you enter into. When I said the kids will pay it, my point on that was, at least in my family, my dad said, look, I'll take out a loan for you, but when you get out of school, you're paying it back.
Okay.
That's what I meant about the kids. But from a loan contract standpoint, they're like, we don't care what your family comes up with as an agreement, but somebody in this family's got to pay us X amount of dollars per month.
Okay.
Yep.
I have a follow-up question too.
Sure. Yep.
So when I was talking to my mother about like student loans, she said that it when you take out a student loan, it automatically goes to your parents, and that didn't sound right to me, but I don't know. So
No, that's a great question. On those first two types of loans that have that limit per year, the subsidized and the unsubsidized.
yeah.
And forgive me, Kai, because I don't remember what the amount that you can borrow on unsubsidized is. I want to say it's $5,500 a year. So I think in total you can get up to like $8,000 or $9,000 in debt from the government per year. Those subsidized and unsubsidized loans that are in the student's name are not tied to your parents.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
again, bad examples. I know they're very depressing, but if I took out subsidized and unsubsidized loans from the federal government in my name only, and I pass away after I'm done with school, no one's going to have to pay that debt back.
Okay.
Now, usually I don't have people take the government up on that offer to get out of debt, but nobody has to pay that back. Parent Plus loans and any private loans where you get a co-signer, where your parents had to sign on with you, that's where it comes in that if something happens to you, even though you were the student that the debt was based on, if you're gone, they still want their money.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you. That was really helpful.
No problem. Sorry this is so depressing at this point.
I mean, life is depressing.
I know, but I don't often find people walk out of the student loan seminar like super uplifted. We can do another one where maybe we talk about some more sunshiny stuff. How that sound?
Sounds good. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions while we're kind of in the middle of this?
I have a follow-up question.
Yep.
So I usually hear that when you take out a student loan, even if you pass away, it will pass on to your next generation or something. Is that true?
Again,
For the Parent Plus loan or like the co-sign loan, is that true?
So I'm going to give you an example. Again, I'm going to come back to what I said to Kai. Subsidized and unsubsidized loans, provided that they are always in your name and you never change that structure, they go when you go. Okay? A Parent Plus loan, that's in the name of your parent. So it would be my understanding that when the parent dies, that Parent Plus loan goes away. I don't think that it goes on to the student at that point. But Min, I'm going to look that up for you, okay? Other private loans where you have had people co-sign on them, and this is true for any loan, by the way, when you get out in the quote-unquote real world. I hate that term, but whenever you go and take out debt, there's a contract, a loan contract between the lender, usually a bank, not always, and the borrower. And those borrowers will be named on the loan document. And then there's like a whole bunch of terms in it, terms to the contract. So look, if I'm giving you the best advice I can give you, and by the way, I didn't do it, so I'm sure most of you won't either. The best advice I could give you would be to read through every single one of your loan contracts. But they're like, it's like reading another language. They're very difficult to follow. But technically speaking, whatever is in those loan contracts is what dictates what happens after you go. Usually, the loan contract is between the borrower and the lender, and the risk that the lender takes on is that if the borrower or borrowers die, they don't get their money back. Now, let me give you an example of how they sometimes curb that. Very, very often, if you go to a bank and you borrow money for a house, they almost always require you to have something called mortgage insurance. And what mortgage insurance does is it essentially puts a policy on your life that is directly related to the amount of money you still owe them, so that if you die, the bank gets a payoff from the life insurance exactly equivalent to what you owed them for the amount of the mortgage, and they're made whole. Does that make sense? Any other questions I can answer?
Alex,
Yeah.
I found a citation online, like an article that talks about the same thing that you were talking about, what happens to your student loans when a child, or what happens with parents to a child's student loans if the child passes. So it's in the chat window, and I've also put it in my notes.
Great. Okay, and I'll look through it too, and I'll see if I can kind of just give you a little one sentence thing to explain what I understand from it after I've had a look through it. There's forgive me for not knowing it all, guys, but there's just so many rules that it's I can't keep them all in my head. But like I say, I'm going all the way back to the beginning of this seminar. There's tools and resources and people who can help you demystify this stuff. So please, 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 if you have questions after this, don't hesitate to reach out. I can help to sort of translate some of these questions for you and get the answers from my team of experts that I have behind me. Alyssa, I know that we had planned on jumping into the budgeting stuff and looking at budgeting examples, but I'm looking at the clock and I am looking a little bit at people's faces too. And I generally speaking find in my seminars that when you hit an hour, it's like a saturation point that you don't get a lot of value after the hour because it's, you know, it's all stuff that was sort of Greek before and we've gone through a lot of detail. So can I make a recommendation that we table the budgeting and we do it in a separate webinar or a separate seminar?
That's fine with me. Are you guys, so just so all you guys know.
Seeing some thumbs up.
Yeah.
Good.
When Alex was talking about, I reached out to some of our 2013 alums who are the first cohort that graduated and are like in the real world now, to find out like how much money they're making. Did they graduate college? Are they living with their parents? How much are their bills? How much are their student loans? All that stuff, so that you can like see what happens to our kids, like people who are just like you. And so what you can expect. So that's what Alex is talking about. And I think, Alex, if I'm hearing you right, you're saying that there's enough meat in there that A, we're not going to cover it in 10 minutes, and B, we reach the saturation point, so it would be like more delicious to bite into the meatball at another time.
Right. Which unfortunately means that we've ended on a discussion about what happens to your loans if you die, but you know, what are you gonna do?
Well, don't die, y'all.
That's right, don't die. Don't die. What a great ending point.
Right?
We do still have a few minutes though, so does anybody have any questions about the stuff that we've covered?
And you guys feel free to ask anything. You can type the questions or you can write them in the chat. And you can.
Hello?
Rather.
Yeah.
Hello?
Hello.
Wait, can you hear me?
I can.
Can you
Can you hear me? Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear us?
All right. So, my question was, I heard if you have a subsidized loan for some schools, is after like 6 months, that's when you haven't paid the loan. That's when the interest starts adding up. Like, I just wanted to know if that's true, because, yeah.
Oh, yes. Okay. I'm sorry, Amma. Now I understand your question. Okay. So I think what your question really is at what point in time does your deferment end? And generally speaking, you're correct. You don't have to pay the loans back, not just for 4 years, but oftentimes they give you a grace period of 6 months after you graduate before you have to start making payments on those loans. You're correct. I'm sorry. I just didn't get it in the chat, but I get it now. Is that what your question was? All right, great, perfect. Yes. So you just have to pay attention to and believe me, they will tell you. You'll get, a stack of letters like this saying, your loan's going to come out of deferment. You got to pick a payment plan, all that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, like I say, pay attention to this, but it's usually about 6 months after you get out of school that they start making you pay those. They give you a little bit of time to sort of find a job, get settled, et cetera, and so forth, have some money coming in, and then they start wanting their money. Now, remember, Amma, that is only with subsidized loans that interest will not grow until that deferment time is over. For unsubsidized loans, your deferment, meaning when they start asking for the payments, won't be until 6 months after you graduate. But all that interest is continuing to grow during all of that time. The 4 years of school plus the 6 months. Okay? Any other questions I can answer for people? No, shaking of heads. We're all good. It's a Saturday. It's 2:30 in the afternoon. We've done enough of this for one day. Hey, you guys, this has worked out really, really well. I'm happy to do more. If you liked it, please, if you can, provide feedback to Alyssa. Alyssa, are you going to do some kind of a survey or something like that?
I wasn't, but I can.
Maybe like just a 2-question, 3-question survey, something super simple that you guys can fill out that gives you a chance to say, yes, liked this, no, didn't like this, and maybe questions for future seminars you'd like me to cover, and we can kind of build the content from there. But you guys have been so great. Thank you for making it interactive. I know it's tough on a webinar, but I really appreciate it. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
My pleasure, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And best of luck on your college applications.
Thanks. Oh.
Thank you.
You bet.
Bye, you guys.
Bye.
Bye.